art and biophysics is really important to us now, if not only in terms of the vocabulary. Think how resonant these terms on the screen are relative to how we discuss art practice, and is exactly how the biophysicists discuss their practice. I must briefly allude then to the chemistry of the mind. This is the sort of traditional system of using plants, of changing consciousness, of entering other sorts of worlds. We know that neuroscience and the chemists dealing with consciousness now are also exploring with other kinds of man-made drugs the ways in which we can inquire into those sort of folds of consciousness which have been forbidden since the Enlightenment. We've had very strict rules about where the mind can go, and we're just coming out of that. Well, could almost call it intellectual prison, and exploring further. So I won't describe this too much, but I mean, we have to rationalize. We certainly have to restructure our thinking. I think the relationship between chemistry and the brain. That seems to me is where the next, if you like, next important move in art will be. Beyond the digital will be the chemical. And we better be prepared for that, I think, because lots of political changes, of course, will have to be made before that can rise to the surface and be overt in our society. Just to say, La Police du Texte was rethought by, Elif Aita will be speaking, who is here later today, but Max Moswitzer, Salavi, a Munich-based computer scientist, and so on, together built a world of text. So it was to try to move on from La Police du Texte, the initial play with text, to an actual three-dimensional world of text, which they built, and which one could inhabit and move through and so forth. So very, very quickly then, a shift from the modern to the postmodern to the syncretic, a move from content, which is what artists used to be responsible for, to creating context, which artists were responsible for in the postmodern era, to the whole nature of field, in which responsibility is a difficult question to deal with, and the generative forms of practice have to be considered. I can't go into great detail about that now, but just to signal the fact that I think there is this change is taking place from the postmodern to the syncretic, so these topics, it seems to me, if you think of that chart I showed from Canada, these are the topics perhaps that might be concerning us as we build curricula and so on now, amplifying thought, designing identity, seeding structures rather than top-down design, making metaphors and sharing consciousness. So very briefly, I've got to move on, I know, I'm sorry, I must do that. I very, very briefly want to make one point before I look at the Planetary Collegium, and that concerns the senses. Part of the proscription that the Enlightenment brought about, and all those corners of the mind that were forbidden for entry, now have to be opened up and explored, in my view. So we used to have this idea of the senses of the first order: sight, hearing, touch, smell, and taste. The neuroscientists brought in a whole lot of others. But now we've got to go back to think about second order senses. I mean, let me just say this, for example. If you were at a faculty meeting at the moment, or the board meeting of an important corporation trying to raise money, and any of the words on this list were uttered by you, you would be shown the door. You would be out of the meeting almost immediately. And particularly if you went to MIT at the moment, not only would they call it hand waving, they would cut off your hands. I mean, just, you would have to forget it. And yet, it's in that area, I believe, that we should be exploring more and more thoroughly, with chemistry or without it, with somatic practices or without them. But certainly, it seems to me that these topics, these areas of inquiry, are ones that we will be exploring more and more in the future. I'm backed, I'll end just this little bit with the fact of the radical constructivism I was talking about. But there are these questions, you see, how you evaluate media arts research. How do you do that? What are we going to do? The traditional ways of doing we're not do in universities. And who will guide the guides? I mean, I find it, my nightmare every month is to find an examiner for my PhD candidates. because the PhD candidates themselves really should be the examiners. I mean, they just don't exist. Where are they?